Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to Bookspin. We are now in the start of June, so it's time for another monthly wrap-up video. I'm going to start off by looking back on the books that I read during May. So I started off the month by finishing off Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which is the classic dystopian novel. Very chilling to read. I'm glad that I finally reread it after many years. This book's often paired with 1984 as one of the great dystopian classics of the 20th century. Personally, I think 1984 holds up much better as a novel. I think it's got a more gripping narrative and the characters are more interesting. But I think Brave New World has got some pretty compelling concepts. It's quite a thought-provoking read. So if I ever make a list of dystopian recommendations, this book will be in there for sure. And then I moved on to Looking Backward by Edward Bellamy, which is a classic 19th century socialist utopian novel. So this book has got a very interesting history and it's quite a fascinating product of its time. But I'd say it probably has limited appeal to most modern readers. You can find out more in the review video that I made if you'd like to know more about this book. I also read Luminous by Sylvia Park, which is a new release which the publisher sent to me. This is a debut novel on the theme of robots and artificial intelligence, and it's set in a near future reunified Korea. So this is a very character-focused novel. It's got elements of family drama and police procedural, and it really feels like a good example of literary science fiction, kind of in the mold of things like Clara and the Sun. I think it's an impressive debut. It's immersive, it's well written, and it feels like this author's got quite a distinctive voice. So I'm going to be interviewing her quite soon, in a couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that video, and we'll talk about this book some more in that video. Then I moved on to Other Worlds, Other Gods, which is an anthology edited by Mayo Mose. This is a collection of short stories on the theme of religion in science fiction. And there's some great stories in here. I talked about them in my most recent review video. And I think it's a really interesting theme. The intersection of sci-fi and religion. In fact, one of my ideas for a future video will be on this very theme. Okay, I want to talk about books on this theme, but there's a few more books that I'd like to read related to sci-fi and religion before I get around to that. So it'll probably be a little while before I get around to that video, but it's one of my ideas. And then the book which I moved on to after that was The High Crusade. Okay, this is the book which I'm reading at the minute. I'll show you my copy. By Poul Anderson. So this is a vintage sci-fi novel from the 60s, I think. Quite a short read. So it's a kind of first contact alien invasion story, but it's set in medieval times. Okay, so quite an intriguing premise. We've got an extraterrestrial imperial spaceship which turns up in a medieval English town. If that's not crazy enough, the townspeople somehow manage to capture this ship, and then the ship sends them on a kind of autopilot space voyage to an alien colony planet, and things start to get even more crazy. So it's a preposterous premise, but it's entertaining, and it's very light-hearted in tone. There's some great humour in here. It's a good palate cleanser between longer and more serious books. So those are all the physical books which I've been reading. I've also been listening to a couple of audiobooks recently. So I listened to a non-fiction book called Deconverted, A Journey from Religion to Reason by Seth Andrews. And it's a kind of autobiography read by the author. Seth Andrews is an atheist activist and host of the Thinking Atheist podcast. I've listened to a few of his audiobooks before. He's got a very kind of smooth voice, which is a pleasure to listen to. And in this case, he talks about his life as a former Christian radio host before losing his religion and becoming an atheist. So it's an interesting story. Some of it I've heard before in his other books and his podcasts, but it's still a very engaging read if you're interested in this kind of thing. And then after I finished Deconverted, I was browsing Audible to see what else was out there that I might be interested in. And I noticed that there was another book that was narrated by Seth Andrews, but he hadn't actually written himself. So I was curious about that. And it was called The Kafir Project by Lee Bervine. And it's a novel. It's actually fiction. So I looked into it some more, and I found out it's a kind of sci-fi mystery thriller with religious themes and atheistic themes. So that got me interested, and yeah, I've listened to about 4 hours so far out of 10 hours total, and it's a wild ride so far. It's really gripping. Some fascinating concepts. I'll let you know more once I've actually finished it, but I'm really enjoying it. So those are all of the books which I've been reading or listening to recently. Let's move on. I've also picked up a couple of new books in May. So starting off with this book, Project Pope by Clifford Simak. This one I picked up from an online seller, and this is continuing the theme of religious science fiction. And this is one book I thought I should add to my TBR for when I eventually get around to making that video. I don't know much about this one, but I do know that it features religious robots, and it's got positive reviews. It's Clifford Simak, and it's got a cool cover illustration, so that's good enough for me. The other book which I picked up is this book, The Rediscovery of Man, the complete short science fiction of Cordwainer Smith. Now, Cordwainer Smith is one of my favourite short story writers. I previously recommended this book before on my channel, which is also rather confusingly called The Rediscovery of Man, but it's not actually the same book. This is a retitled edition of The Best of Cordwainer Smith, which only collects some of his stories. But I've always wanted to reread these stories and explore more of his work. So I ordered this Nesfer Press book, and this contains all of the short stories that he ever wrote, at least all of his short science fiction stories. And now I've set myself a reading project. So my goal is to read every single one of these stories and make a short video on each of them. I mean, I'm in no particular hurry to do this. This is quite a long book. There are a lot of stories in here. I'm just going to read them and talk about them as and when I feel like it, basically, alongside my other reading. I've already read the first story, and I'll be uploading a video on that one quite soon. Okay, so let's take a look at what's in store for my reading plans for June. Now, first up, I need to finish The High Crusade, of course, and The Kafir Project. But as for my next physical book to read, I've decided to read this book, The Door into Summer, which I think is quite an appropriate title since we are now at the start of summer. At least in the Northern Hemisphere, the 1st of June is the start of meteorological summer. So I have no idea if summer itself has anything to do with the actual theme of this novel, but it's a really beautiful vintage paperback, I think you'll agree, in great condition. And looking at some reviews on Goodreads, this has got time travel as a theme. It also has a cat, so it's suitable for cat lovers. So, it's got all the ingredients which I could ask for: cats, time travel, vintage sci-fi. I mean, I have had mixed experiences with Heinlein before, but I think I'll probably enjoy this. So, I'll be reading that book soon. And then later on in the month, I think I need to finally get started reading Peter F. Hamilton. Pandora's Star. It's been a long enough wait, I think. The Commonwealth Saga, the duology. This is book 1. Okay. This is a huge book. It's about 900 pages long, I think, this hardback edition. I met Peter F. Hamilton last year, and I got him to sign this book, as you can see. And this is part 1 of a duology, which is followed by Judas Unchained. I've heard a lot of good things about these 2 books. And it was one of my reading goals was to read this duology in 2025. So that's what I intend to do this summer. I don't know how long it's going to take me. It's probably going to take me quite a long time, but I'm very excited to get started. But before I do get started on Pandora's Star, though, I just want to pick one more book from the TBR Prompt Picker. Right, so this is the TBR Prompt Picker. Let's see what we're going to get this time. A collaboration. So, I've done what I usually do with the TBR Prompt Picker, and I've picked out a few books from my bookshelves which fit into this category. Although I couldn't really find very many books which are actually collaborations. But I've managed to find three novels which are collaborations between 2 authors. Here they are. Any one of these I think would be interesting to read. The first one is Under Heaven's Bridge by Ian Watson and Michael Bishop. 2 authors who I've read their work before, and I've really enjoyed the novels that I have read by these authors. And this book came as a recommendation from Alistair Reynolds. It's a nice slim paperback from the early 80s. I think this will be worth a read, although it's got quite a low average score on Goodreads. Another option is The Forever Machine by Mark Clifton and Frank Riley. And I've got this lovely vintage paperback here, which is in excellent condition. So it's very tempting to read this copy. Now this is a 1950s Hugo Award winner, but it's got a bit of a sort of negative reputation as being one of the worst Hugo Award winning novels. So take that with a pinch of salt. Still tempting to read. I would like to give this book a try. Look at that beautiful cover art. Again, a nice slim vintage paperback. And the other collaboration is Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, Roadside Picnic. Now this one is an absolute classic. I've not read it before. It's been on my TBR for many years, pretty much since I started this channel. And this is the SF Masterworks edition. Now, I think I'm probably going to have to choose this book because it's been on my TBR for so long and it's widely regarded as a classic. As much as I'm tempted by these vintage paperbacks, this book has got such a good reputation. I've seen many reviews out there full of high praise for this particular book. So it's on my list of shame. This is a good chance for me to tick this one off. So I'm going to add Roadside Picnic to my June TBR before I get started on Pandora's Star. So that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.